When trainers first stepped into Kanto in the mid-1990s, they entered a world that felt impossibly alive compared to most other games of its time. Towns, forests, and caves blended together into a single adventure, and through the limitations of the Game Boy's small screen, an entire cultural phenomenon began to form. At the heart of it all was a creature that, at first, wasn't meant to be the franchise's face. That Pokémon is Pikachu. In the earliest red and green versions released in Japan in 1996, Pikachu was tucked away in Viridian Forest, a random encounter unlike its future fame. It was just another member of a larger roster, and catching it was more of a novelty than a necessity. Its sprite at the time looked noticeably different, rounder, chubbier, and less sleek than the design players now associate with it. Early artwork reinforced this fat Pikachu look, a style chosen because the limited pixel space made round shapes easier to render. This was long before its modern redesign, where slimming down and smoothing the proportions allowed for a cuter and more dynamic mascot. One obscure fact is that in Kanto's original games, the encounter rate for this creature was quite low in Viridian Forest, making it feel rare to stumble upon. Players who did catch one often treated it as a special companion, not realizing they were holding what would later become the series' icon. In fact, internal developer notes suggested that Clefairy was originally considered as the mascot due to its role in the Pokémon fairy tale theme of the time. But after the anime launched, the decision to spotlight Pikachu as Ash's partner reshaped the entire brand. That change was reflected in Pokémon Yellow, released in 1998 in Japan and 1999 worldwide, where the creature was elevated to starter status, complete with a unique overworld sprite that followed the player around. Yellow introduced another obscure detail, the creature's happiness mechanic. Unlike other Pokémon, it displayed moods when spoken to, ranging from cheerful to angry depending on how well it was treated. This small touch made players feel like they were traveling with a living partner rather than just a battle tool. The feature was a precursor to mechanics in later generations, like Friendship Evolution and Pokémon Amy. It was also the first time the series leaned into tying the games directly to the anime, with Jessie and James appearing alongside their iconic companion Meowth, further bridging game and show. The Kanto region itself was built around a simple but effective design philosophy. Every route, cave, and town fed into a sense of progression without needing excessive dialogue. Players traveling through Viridian Forest toward Pewter City weren't just meeting their first trainers and their first gym, they were experiencing the blueprint of exploration that would define the series. Viridian's maze of trees gave way to Brock's rocky arena, establishing the idea of themed gyms tied to regional geography. This design choice reinforced the idea that Kanto was a living ecosystem, not just a collection of maps. Early sprite work adds another layer of fascination. The original Japanese red and green games featured sprites that were, in many cases, rough and intimidating. Pikachu's sprite in those versions had smaller eyes and a bulkier frame, giving it a more rodent-like appearance than the rounded mascot fans recognize today. When the games were released internationally as Red and Blue in 1998, many sprites were redrawn for clarity and appeal. This included giving Pikachu a cuter, more expressive face, beginning the slow shift toward its modern identity. Collectors today often compare the differences in sprite work, noting that Kanto's creatures sometimes looked like entirely different designs depending on which version was being played. Another obscure fact ties to the Game Boy hardware itself. The system's limited sound chip was pushed to its limits to create the iconic cries of each Pokémonday. Pikachu's cry in the original games was a series of distorted tones that, while distinctive, bore little resemblance to the character's later anime voice. It wasn't until Pokémon Yellow on the Game Boy Color that its cry was updated to match the high-pitched Pika sound familiar from the show, marking one of the first direct crossovers between game and television identity. This detail often surprises newer fans who assume the voice was always consistent across media. The Kanto region's layout also hides development shortcuts. For instance, the placement of Viridian Forest directly between the player's home in Pallet Town and the first gym in Pewter City wasn't just to showcase early battles. It was also a way to teach players the value of catching multiple Pokémon, since Brock's rock types would easily overpower a single low-level starter. By including Pikachu in the forest, the designers subtly encouraged players to diversify, since electric types had advantages against certain enemies down the line. Though not useful against Brock, the little mouse became powerful against Misty's water types in Cerulean City, creating a built-in incentive to keep training it. One development quirk lies in the unused data of the original games. Hidden within the code of Red and Green are remnants of mechanics that never made it into the final release. This includes missing cries, incomplete move data, and even placeholder Pokémon slots. These leftovers reveal how rushed the development cycle was. Pikachu's placement in Viridian Forest may have been a late decision, chosen more for encounter balance than for any long-term marketing plan. The fact that such an ordinary placement later spawned a global mascot is a reminder of how unpredictable cultural phenomena can be. Kanto's music also played a role in creating atmosphere. The high-pitched, cheerful tune of Viridian Forest contrasted with the darker, more foreboding tones of Lavender Town later in the journey. Pikachu's early placement in a cheerful, adventurous area helped cement its association with youthful beginnings. Composers like Junichi Masuda deliberately wrote simple, looping tracks that could evoke mood with minimal instrumentation. The forest theme, while light-hearted, carries just enough tension to reflect the challenge of navigating trainers and wild battles, creating an emotional imprint for players who encountered their first special capture there. An overlooked detail in Pokémon Yellow is that the player's companion refused to evolve. While other Pikachu could evolve into Raichu with a Thunderstone, this one was locked in its unevolved form. This design choice aligned with the anime, where Ash's Pikachu rejected evolution. At the time, it was one of the first examples of the games breaking their own rules to maintain consistency with another medium. For many fans, it was their first lesson that game mechanics could bend in service of story and identity. There is also an interesting linguistic quirk tied to Kanto's original releases. The Japanese names of towns and Pokémon often carried puns or cultural references that were lost in translation. Pikachu's name, however, survived intact because it was already a fusion of Japanese onomatopoeia, Pika, representing the spark of electricity, and Chu, the sound of a mouse squeak. The decision to keep it unchanged across languages contributed to its universal recognition, unlike other creatures whose names varied between regions. Over time, this little mouse became the face of the franchise, but its roots remain humble. In Kanto, it was just another encounter in a forest, a small surprise among bugs and birds. The fact that it rose from that position to global mascot is one of the most obscure and fascinating details about the region's history. Without the anime's influence, Without the decision to redesign sprites for international release, and without the experimental tie-in of Pokémon Yellow, it might never have gained the spotlight at all. When players today revisit Kanto through remakes like Fire Red, Leaf Green, or Let's Go Pikachu, they experience a blend of nostalgia and modern polish. In Let's Go specifically, Pikachu was once again given the starring role, reinforcing how inseparable it has become from the region's identity. The journey from Pallet Town through Viridian Forest and into Pewter City continues to introduce new generations to a world where small details, like stumbling across a chubby yellow mouse, can change gaming history forever. In 1996, when the first versions of Pokémon were released in Japan, the choice of box art defined how players perceived the adventure they were about to begin. Instead of generic heroes or landscapes, the covers featured creatures themselves, making them the first ambassadors of a world few had ever imagined. That decision placed 3 specific figures into the spotlight: Charizard, Venusaur, and Blastoise. The Japanese release began with Red and Green, where Venusaur fronted green while Charizard blazed across red. For international players, however, the versions were shifted. When the games were localized in 1998, Blue replaced Green, and Blastoise was chosen as the face of the new version. The swap between regions led to confusion for years, with fans debating why one starter's final form was spotlighted in Japan but sidelined elsewhere. The reality was simpler. Localization teams chose box art that they thought would appeal to Western audiences, and Charizard's fiery presence seemed more dynamic compared to Venusaur's plant-like design. One obscure fact is that the box art illustrations were not created by Game Freak directly, but by artist Ken Sugimori, whose watercolor style gave each Pokémon a painterly look. These illustrations became the definitive faces of the franchise. Yet the specific stylistic choices, such as Charizard's curved horns or Venusaur's textured skin, differ noticeably from the pixelated sprites players saw in-game. For many children, this contrast between the majestic art and the crude sprites added to the sense of mystery, as though the true essence of the creatures was hidden just beyond the Game Boy's limitations. Blastoise's introduction as the mascot for Blue created its own layers of trivia. In Japan, Blue was originally released as a mail-order edition, with refined sprites, bug fixes, and smoother text. When localized, those assets were used as the base for the international Red and Blue, effectively merging multiple versions into one. This meant that the Blastoise cover wasn't just a marketing choice, but a reflection of the updated game data. Players outside Japan unknowingly received a slightly more polished experience compared to those who had begun with the rougher red and green. Sprite work differences between versions provide some of the most fascinating obscure details. Charizard's sprite in Japanese red and green is elongated and awkward, almost reptilian, with a pose that doesn't quite resemble the dynamic dragon from the box art. Venusaur's sprite varies dramatically across versions, sometimes with a squat, toad-like body, other times with exaggerated leaves. Blastoise also shifted between bulky, turtle-like designs and more dynamic cannon aiming stances. Collectors who compare screenshots across versions often remark that these creatures look like entirely different designs depending on which cartridge was played. Another hidden fact ties to marketing. In the United States, promotional materials for Red and Blue often emphasized Charizard's ferocity, highlighting its fire-type attacks and dragon-like appearance. Venusaur, by contrast, was frequently downplayed in advertisements, despite being one of the original box mascots in Japan. This imbalance helped cement Charizard's reputation as one of the most popular Pokémon in the West, a legacy that continues today. Blastoise sat somewhere in between, admired for its cannons, but rarely achieving the same mythic status. Localization added further quirks. The names of moves and abilities were often adjusted to better fit Western audiences, and the names of the Pokémon themselves sometimes shifted dramatically. These three, however, retained names close to their Japanese counterparts, emphasizing continuity between regions. The main differences lay in pronunciation and presentation, which subtly shaped how fans talked about them. For example, many Western players pronounced Venusaur with emphasis on soar, like dinosaur, while Japanese players associated it with Fushigi, meaning mysterious, from its original name, Fushigibana. One obscure design detail concerns the box colors themselves. In Japan, red and green represented natural opposites, fire and plant, energy and growth. Adding blue later introduced water as the third element, creating a symbolic triangle of balance. This elemental balance was somewhat lost in translation when only red and blue were released internationally. For Western audiences, the absence of green gave the impression that Venusaur was less important, when in reality it was central to the Japanese identity of the games. The differences extended into Pokémon Yellow as well. In that version, neither Charizard, Venusaur, nor Blastoise appeared on the box art, replaced instead by Pikachu to align with the anime. However, all three remained available in-game, obtainable as gift Pokémon to mirror Ash's journey in the television show. This unique inclusion allowed players to wield all three starters at once, something not possible in the original Red and Green. The decision further highlighted the cultural weight of these creatures, as they were deemed essential to recreating the full anime-inspired experience. Another overlooked fact ties to early promotional tournaments in Japan. During these events, Charizard and Blastoise were often given the spotlight as powerful battlers, while Venusaur was frequently overlooked. This imbalance mirrored marketing trends and created an enduring perception that the fire and water starters were more competitive, even though in-game balance often gave Venusaur useful resistances and support moves. The cultural echo of those early tournaments can still be felt in how fans rank the starters today. These three creatures also played roles in shaping player identity. Choosing Charizard's line often marked a desire for power and aggression. Venusaur's choice reflected patience and growth, and Blastoise represented defense and control. In playground debates, these choices became shorthand for personality traits, cementing the starters not only as game mechanics, but as cultural symbols. The fact that their box art identities varied between regions only deepened the mystery, leaving fans to argue over which version was true. Taken together, the differences in box art, sprites, and regional marketing reveal how Kanto's identity was shaped as much by perception as by design. Charizard's fiery pose, Venusaur's squat resilience, and Blastoise's cannon-laden bulk became the faces of an era, not because they were the strongest, but because they were chosen as mascots for a cultural phenomenon still finding its footing. Buried deep in the code of Kanto's original games were secrets that would shape decades of player myths. That story begins with two very different figures, Mew and Missing No. Mew was not part of the original public roster. It was added late in development by programmer Shigeki Morimoto as a hidden bonus, occupying unused data space. Its presence wasn't revealed officially at first, but rumors began circulating in 1996 that a secret Pokémon could be obtained through special means. This sparked one of gaming's first great urban legends. The secrecy was deliberate. Developers hoped that whispers of something hidden would spread organically, building excitement. When it was finally confirmed through special events, players rushed to obtain it, cementing it as one of the most mysterious creatures in the series. One obscure fact is that Mew's event distributions and mystique turbocharged trading culture around the existing link cable, helping turn exchanging Pokémon into a social ritual. Because it could only be distributed through events or glitches, players needed to trade to obtain it legally. This reinforced the social aspect of the games, making the hidden Pokémon not just a prize, but a symbol of community connection. The choice to hide it, far from being an accident, became one of the most brilliant marketing moves in video game history. Missing No, by contrast, was never intended to exist. It was the byproduct of how the game handled data storage. The name itself, short for missing number, appeared when players manipulated the code through glitches, such as the famous Old Man and item duplication glitch. Encountering this creature could scramble Hall of Fame data, elongate sprites, or produce bizarre visual effects. For many children, discovering it felt like stumbling into forbidden territory, as though the cartridge itself was alive with secrets. The glitch quickly spread through playground rumors. Children passed along instructions on how to encounter it, often mixing real mechanics with fanciful myths. Some claimed that catching Missing No would corrupt the save file entirely, while others swore it could evolve into Mew or unlock hidden features. The actual effect most players cared about was the duplication of items in the 6th slot of the inventory, which turned it into a tool for infinite rare candies or master balls. An overlooked detail is that different versions of red, green, and blue produce different glitch Pokémonday. While Missing No became the most famous internationally, Japanese players encountered slightly different sprites and names due to how the versions handled data. This means that even the mythology of the glitch varied between regions, with some players insisting that their version's glitch Pokémon were unique species rather than errors. Mew and Missing No together created a dual mythology. One was a secret intentionally hidden by the developers, and the other was an accident that players embraced as though it were intentional. Both revealed the richness of Kanto's code, where unused data and quirks of programming became as important to culture as official designs. The cultural impact of these secrets cannot be overstated. Mew's mystique fueled some of the earliest online gaming communities, as players exchanged theories about where to find it. Missing No, meanwhile, made players feel like they had broken through the boundaries of the game world, peeking behind the curtain of its creation. Both contributed to the sense that Kanto was more than a set of maps. It was a living, breathing system full of hidden corners. The long-term influence is clear. Later generations of Pokémon would continue to include hidden creatures, event distributions, and even deliberate mysteries, all inspired by the success of Mew's secrecy. Meanwhile, glitch hunting became its own culture, with players scouring games for errors that might lead to new discoveries. The DNA of those early myths runs through the entire franchise. Mew represents deliberate secrecy. Missing No represents accidental wonder. Together, they remind players that Kanto's world was not just about what was visible on the screen, but what was hidden in the code, waiting to be discovered by curious minds. At the eastern edge of Kanto, a small town rests beneath a heavy silence, its music etched into the memories of anyone who wandered through the 8-bit world. Lavender Town became a cultural phenomenon, not just for what it contained, but for what it suggested, a place where game design, folklore, and urban legends intertwined. Anchoring this atmosphere were the first true ghostly figures in the franchise, the Ghastly Line, culminating in the spectral presence of Gengar. In the original Red and Green, this town was the location of the Pokémon Tower, a burial ground that introduced players to the concept of mortality in a children's game. The tower was filled with channelers who had been possessed, creating eerie dialogue such as "Give me blood" in early Japanese text, which was softened during localization. For players in 1996, encountering such themes within the cheerful world of Pokémon was jarring, cementing Lavender as one of the most haunting areas in gaming history. Ghastly and its evolutions were the only true ghost types available in Kanto, yet their typing came with a hidden flaw at the time. No damaging ghost type moves actually worked against psychic types due to a programming oversight. Nightshade was their main offensive move, but it dealt fixed damage rather than exploiting weaknesses. This meant that while the Pokédex described them as powerful against psychics, in practice they were not. Many players who trained the line expecting an advantage against Sabrina's gym were surprised to find the opposite, a mechanical quirk that remained obscure until data miners clarified it years later. Sprite design reinforced the eerie identity. Ghastly's swirling gas and Haunter's floating hands made them visually distinct from most grounded creatures in the region. Gengar's squat, grinning form became instantly iconic, though early sprites often depicted it with longer limbs or exaggerated smiles, making it more monstrous than playful. In Japanese Red and Green, the shading made it appear more sinister, while the international sprites softened its features slightly. The differences between regions highlight how even pixel art conveyed cultural tone. Lavender Town's music became its own legend. Composed with high-pitched tones and unsettling minor key progressions, it stood out dramatically from the upbeat tracks of other towns. Rumors spread that the frequency of the music caused dizziness or unease in children, an urban myth often exaggerated into claims of sickness. Though untrue, the myth reflects the lasting impression of the track, which used the Game Boy's limited channels to craft a soundscape unlike anything else in the game. The legend of Lavender Town Syndrome grew through internet creepypasta years later, cementing it as one of the most famous pieces of video game folklore. Another obscure fact is that the Pokémon Tower originally contained placeholder sprites for multiple unidentified ghosts. Before acquiring the Sylph Scope, players could not identify wild encounters in the tower, instead battling a generic ghost sprite. This mechanic added mystery, as children speculated what the ghost truly was. Some thought it represented the spirits of fainted Pokémon. Others believed it was evidence of cut content. In truth, the sprite simply blocked progress until the scope was obtained, but the effect was powerful. It turned a simple progression gate into one of the most memorable mysteries in the series. The infamous Marowak ghost encounter added further depth. It was the first instance of a scripted boss that could not be caught, teaching players that not all battles were about victory or capture. This emotional beat underscored the tower's role as a narrative climax, connecting the gameplay to the theme of loss. For children who had grown attached to their own teams, the idea of a creature that had died protecting its child hit unusually hard. Cultural impact extended into merchandise and media. Early manga adaptations emphasized Lavender Town as a horror setting, sometimes portraying the ghosts as far more grotesque than their in-game sprites suggested. The anime softened the imagery, making Gengar more mischievous than malevolent, Yet the episodes still leaned into haunted house tropes. Across different mediums, the town's identity as the dark heart of Kanto persisted. Competitive play for the ghostly line remained limited due to its flawed mechanics, yet Gengar's secondary poison typing gave it access to powerful moves and resistances. By later generations, when ghost moves were fixed, it became a formidable presence, retroactively fulfilling the role it was always meant to play. Shiny versions of the line added further intrigue. Ghastly's subtle blue hue, Haunter's deeper shade, and Gengar's nearly indistinguishable shiny made it one of the hardest shinies to notice without close inspection. This subtlety sparked debates over whether the design choice was intentional, symbolizing the idea of invisibility. Fan myths proliferated around Lavender Town. Some claimed that fainting in the tower without the Sylph Scope could permanently corrupt save data. Others believed that talking to every channeler in a specific order unlocked hidden dialogue. Online rumors in the early 2000s even suggested that connecting two games in the tower could reveal deleted Pokémonday. While none were true, the persistence of these myths shows how powerfully the atmosphere encouraged speculation. Lavender Town's role in Kanto remains unmatched. It stands as proof that even within a cheerful game aimed at children, developers were willing to explore themes of death, loss, and fear. Coupled with the eerie design of Ghastly and its evolutions, the area became a cultural touchstone, remembered as much for its myths as for its mechanics. On the surface, some of Kanto's most unassuming encounters seem almost like jokes. No creature embodies this better than Magikarp, the flopping fish obtained through old rods or from the salesman outside Mount Moon. Yet its legacy is one of the richest in the franchise, tied to fishing mechanics, evolution symbolism, and even foreshadowing of shinies. In the earliest games, Magikarp was coded with only Splash and Tackle, making it appear useless. However, its evolution into Gyarados represented one of the most dramatic transformations in gaming history, turning weakness into ferocity. This design was inspired by an old Chinese legend of the carp that leaps over the Dragon Gate waterfall, transforming into a dragon. By embedding this myth into the evolution line, the developers gave a cultural weight to what might otherwise have been a joke character. Fishing mechanics themselves hold obscure trivia. The Old Rod, Good Rod, and Super Rod each drew from different encounter tables, determining what species could be found. Magikarp was the most common result for the Old Rod, often disappointing new players. However, this commonality reinforced its symbolic role as the underdog. Children who persevered through training were rewarded with one of the most powerful evolutions available in Kanto, teaching patience as a core lesson. The Mount Moon Magikarp salesman is another piece of hidden lore. For 500 Pokédollars, players could purchase the fish, a seemingly worthless scam. Yet this event is coded as one of the few guaranteed early game chances to obtain it without extensive fishing. Some fans argue this was a subtle tutorial in disguise, demonstrating how value can emerge from patience. By giving players a weak companion and letting them discover its evolution later, the developers planted one of the most enduring gameplay lessons in the series. Gyarados itself became a symbol of power, appearing not only as a common team member for rival trainers, but also in memorable story beats. In Kanto, its presence along waterways reinforced the danger of venturing too far without preparation. The creature's intimidating sprite filled the small Game Boy screen, leaving an impression of size far larger than most other Pokémonday. Early Japanese sprites were more serpentine, while later international sprites emphasized its fierce face, contributing to its iconic identity. An obscure mechanical detail involves the red Gyarados. While most players associate it with the Johto region's Lake of Rage in Gold and Silver, the concept has roots in Kanto. Shiny Pokémon were introduced in the next generation. The first-gen titles did not include a rare color system. Gyarados was chosen in Johto as the showcase shiny precisely because of its dramatic color shift, a callback to its central role as an evolution symbol in Kanto. Magikarp's shiny form also carries symbolism. Instead of its usual orange, the shiny is golden, echoing the carp of Chinese mythology and its association with fortune. Gyarados' shiny, by contrast, is crimson, reinforcing its image as a raging beast. These palettes tie directly to the cultural inspiration, adding a layer of meaning beyond aesthetics. Fishing in Kanto also had quirks tied to encounter rates. Some areas allowed only Magikarp to be caught with the old rod, effectively making them junk encounters. Yet because the games tied fishing to specific tiles of water, players discovered that standing in unusual spots could yield different results. This led to myths about secret fishing spots, including persistent rumors that Mew could be hooked with a super rod near the S, and, while untrue, these myths reflect how fishing mechanics encouraged experimentation. The anime further elevated the line's identity. Magikarp was often portrayed comically, flopping uselessly until it evolved, at which point Gyarados unleashed chaos. This narrative reinforced the gameplay lesson in a visual medium, teaching audiences that persistence could yield unexpected results. One of the most memorable episodes featured James purchasing a Magikarp, only to regret it until it transformed into a raging serpent. The comedic framing hid a profound truth about growth and transformation. Competitive battling in early generations saw Gyarados limited by its typing, being both water and flying, which left it vulnerable to electric attacks. However, its strong attack stat and access to moves like Hyper Beam made it a formidable option when trained properly. Later generations expanded its move pool and introduced abilities that boosted its role further, but even in Kanto, its symbolic weight made it a favorite. Shiny hunters today often trace their obsession back to the first time they saw Gyarados, even though Kanto itself did not feature guaranteed shinies. The legend of alternate forms grew from its presence. For many, the Crimson Serpent in Johto felt like an extension of the journey they began years earlier, as though the myth had been seeded in Kanto waters. Fan myths grew around the line as well. Some claimed that teaching Magikarp certain moves before evolution would alter Gyarados' color or stats. Others insisted that fishing in specific tiles in Vermilion Harbor could unlock secret evolutions. These rumors spread in playgrounds and on early internet forums, contributing to the sense that Kanto's waters held infinite secrets. Taken together, Magikarp and Gyarados represent the duality of weakness and strength, of patience rewarded with transformation. Through fishing mechanics, cultural myths, and game design quirks, they embody Kanto's ability to turn even the most unassuming creature into a legend. The Safari Zone of Kanto remains one of the most unusual features of the original games, a sprawling reserve where normal rules of capture were set aside in favor of bait, rocks, and limited steps. Within this walled garden live some of the rarest encounters in the region, including two that stand out as symbols of obscurity and mystery: Farfetch'd and Kangaskhan. Farfetch'd is one of the most culturally rooted creatures in the first generation, yet one of the easiest to overlook. Its name originates from a Japanese pun, kamo negi, meaning a duck with green onions, which is a phrase implying an improbable stroke of luck. The idea is that if a duck shows up already carrying the ingredients for cooking, fortune has come your way. This cultural joke does not fully translate into English, leaving many Western players confused by its odd design of a bird perpetually clutching a leek. What seems strange outside Japan was instantly familiar to its original audience. Obscure details about this Pokemon's rarity often surprise players. In Kanto's red and blue, it is not normally found in the wild at all. Instead, it can only be obtained through an in-game trade, where a Spearow is exchanged for it in Vermilion City. This trade created a perception of scarcity, making it feel special despite its unimpressive stats. Later generations eventually placed it in wild encounters, but in Kanto, it was essentially locked behind this one-time exchange. Kangaskhan, by contrast, could only be found in the Safari Zone, and even there it was notoriously rare. Its massive sprite, depicting a mother with a baby in her pouch, raised questions about mechanics that the games never answered. The baby was never identified as a separate species, despite being fully visible in battle. This visual detail sparked decades of speculation, with fans debating whether unused data once held plans for a baby Kangaskhan. Some early beta sprites appear to show smaller versions, fueling the myth further. The Safari Zone mechanics themselves amplified the mystery of these creatures. Because players could not weaken targets in battle, capturing them relied on random chance influenced by bait and rocks. Throwing bait made them harder to catch but less likely to flee, while rocks increased the odds of capture but angered them. For rare encounters like Kangaskhan, this often resulted in frustration. Players would spend all their safari balls only to watch it flee. The scarcity of these encounters made them trophies of patience, reinforcing their identity as elusive. Obscure data within the game's code adds further intrigue. Early programming notes suggest that Kangaskhan's catch rate was deliberately set low, ensuring that not every player would obtain one on their first playthrough. This contrasts with the availability of other Safari Zone species, which were easier to capture with persistence. Developers seem to want Kangaskhan to be a symbol of perseverance, an ultimate prize within the strange mechanics of the zone. Shiny versions of both creatures later added unexpected layers. Farfetched's subtle golden tone contrasted with the green of its leek, giving it an almost ceremonial appearance. Kangaskhan's shiny altered its hue to a greenish tint, making the pouch child stand out more. These designs were understated compared to flashier shinies, but for hunters, their rarity in the wild made them especially prized. Cultural myths grew rapidly. In playground rumors, some claimed that evolving the pouch child was possible if Kangaskhan fainted in battle a certain number of times. Others insisted that trading Farfetch'd while holding specific items would unlock alternate evolutions. These myths were never supported by data but spread widely because the creatures themselves seemed incomplete, hinting at hidden potential. The Safari Zone remains one of the most memorable parts of Kanto, not only for its mechanics, but for the sense of mystery it created. Farfetch'd and Kangaskhan exemplify that atmosphere, one a cultural pun lost in translation, the other a mother and child design that invited speculation. Together, they highlight how Kanto's design balanced humor, culture, and mystery, rewarding players who looked beyond the obvious. In a region built on simple mechanics, two creatures stood out for their strange relationship to technology and transformation. Those Pokémon are Ditto and Porygon. Both carried implications far beyond battle, tied to myths, glitches, and even real-world controversies. Ditto's main gimmick was Transform, a move that copied the opponent's appearance, stats, and moves. At first, this seemed like a novelty, but players quickly noticed an obscure connection. Its sprite and base stats were suspiciously similar to those of Mew. They share the same listed weight in the Pokédex, and the shape-shifting theme fueled the failed Mew clone fan theory, but they do not share a breeding group. Mew is in the undiscovered group and cannot breed. This led to the myth that Ditto was a failed clone of Mew, a theory that spread across forums and playgrounds alike. While never confirmed by developers, the coincidences fueled speculation for decades. Its role in breeding mechanics introduced another layer of intrigue. When the daycare was expanded in later generations, Ditto became a universal parent, capable of producing eggs with nearly any species. In Kanto, however, its transformability alone made it a curiosity. Players often experimented with using it in unusual battles, only to find that its fragility limited its usefulness. Yet the symbolic idea of a shapeshifter that mirrored anything captured the imagination, making it a cultural icon despite modest competitive success. Porygon represented the opposite theme, not transformation into others, but creation from technology itself. It was described as a virtual Pokémon, constructed entirely from code and capable of entering cyberspace. In the 1990s, when the internet was still young, this idea was visionary. The creature symbolized digital life at a time when most children had only just begun to understand computers. Its polygonal sprite reinforced the concept, resembling early 3D models rather than organic designs. An infamous real-world event cemented Porygon's notoriety. In 1997, the anime aired an episode titled Denosenshi Porygon, which caused seizures in hundreds of children due to flashing lights during a battle sequence. The incident led to the episode being banned and never aired again, and the creature was unfairly blamed, despite the fact that Pikachu's attack triggered the flashes. As a result, Porygon and its evolutions were rarely featured in the anime thereafter, making it one of the few Pokémon sidelined due to real-world controversy. Shiny versions of these creatures added to their oddity. Ditto's blue coloration emphasized its alien, gelatinous nature, while Porygon's altered hues made it resemble different computer palettes, almost like alternate skins in a digital world. Hunters prized them not only for rarity, but for the thematic resonance of alternate versions of beings already tied to change. Competitive play highlighted unique niches. Ditto's ability to transform into any opponent meant it could sometimes turn the tide of battle, though in early generations, its lack of inherited stats limited it. Later abilities like Imposter improved its viability, but in Kanto, it remained more a curiosity than a powerhouse. Porygon, meanwhile, carried a surprising amount of utility thanks to moves like Conversion, which allowed it to change type mid-battle. Though rarely dominant, it embodied experimentation, appealing to players who wanted to explore unconventional strategies. Community myths surrounded both creatures. Some believed that breeding Ditto with certain Pokémon increased the chance of shinies, a rumor that persisted for years. Others speculated that using Porygon in specific locations, such as Sylph Co., unlocked hidden dialogue or encounters. These myths were untrue, but they reflect how both creatures, tied to code and transformation, naturally inspired speculation about secrets beyond normal gameplay. Taken together, Ditto and Porygon highlight Kanto's fascination with boundaries, between living and digital, between identity and mimicry. One mirrors anything, the other symbolizes artificial creation. Both remain iconic not for their battle prowess, but for the questions they raise, embodying Kanto's ability to blend gameplay quirks with cultural resonance. Traveling through Kanto was never simply a matter of moving forward. The region was designed with roadblocks that forced players to pause, prepare, and rethink their path. Perhaps the most memorable example of this came in the form of a massive creature that slept across the roads, halting progress until specific conditions were met. That Pokémon is Snorlax. This enormous figure was placed strategically on routes 12 and 16, lying in the middle of bridges and pathways. For first-time players, the sight of a sleeping sprite that refused to budge was baffling. Unlike trees that could be cut down or rocks that could be smashed, this obstacle required a completely different approach: the use of the Poké Flute. This item, obtained after clearing out the Celadon City rocket hideout and Lavender Tower storylines, tied Snorlax's presence directly to narrative progression. Only after uniting with the lost spirit of Marowak and helping Mr. Fuji would players receive the flute, symbolizing a connection between compassion, story, and exploration. Obscure details about this encounter include the fact that Snorlax was one of the very few Pokémon in Kanto to appear as a visible overworld sprite before battle. This broke the normal rules of encounters, which were otherwise hidden in tall grass or caves. For many players, this reinforced its identity as an immovable force, a living blockade that demanded attention. Its unique position as both obstacle and rare capture made it unforgettable. Mechanically, Snorlax was also unusual. At level 30, it was significantly stronger than most wild Pokémon, boasting enormous health and powerful attacks. Players attempting to capture it often found their teams overwhelmed, especially since the encounter could only occur twice in the entire game. Once defeated, it did not respawn, making it a one-time opportunity to obtain a powerful ally. This scarcity, combined with its placement, gave it a sense of weight unmatched by most encounters. Design elements also tie it to cultural roots. Design notes have pointed to Koji Nishino, a Game Freak developer, as a key inspiration for its laid-back look and appetite. The folklore Earthquake Catfish connection is a fan interpretation, not confirmed canon. While Snorlax is not aquatic, its massive, immovable presence echoes this folklore of creatures whose slumber shapes the environment. Ken Sugimori later mentioned that Snorlax was inspired by Koji Nishino, a Game Freak employee known for his large appetite and laid-back personality, blending humor with myth to create one of the most endearing designs. The Poké Flute itself carries symbolic meaning. It is one of the few items in Kanto that produces music, and its use to awaken Snorlax reinforces themes of sound as connection. Music in the series often signals transitions, whether through Lavender Town's eerie theme, Vermilion City's harbor tune, or the triumphant Indigo Plateau fanfare. Using sound to wake the giant ties mechanics directly to Kanto's emphasis on atmosphere, giving players an emotional memory that lingers long after other gatekeepers existed throughout the region. HM mechanics like Cut, Surf, Strength, and Flash were required to bypass obstacles, turning exploration into a series of tests. These barriers often forced players to catch and train specific species, ensuring they engaged with more of the Pokédex. Snorlax stands out, however, because it was not simply a barrier, but a personality, a living presence blocking the path. Shiny hunters later appreciated Snorlax's alternate palette, which shifted its normally blue-green body to a darker hue. While subtle compared to more dramatic shinies, its rarity and symbolic role made it highly sought after. In later remakes like Fire Red and Leaf Green, as well as Heart Gold and Soul Silver, encountering a shiny Snorlax became one of the most coveted achievements due to the limited opportunities to trigger the battle. Competitive battling also gave it an enduring legacy. With high health, strong defenses, and a versatile move pool, Snorlax became a staple of early tournaments. In Generation I's competitive scene, it was one of the most used Pokémon, capable of walling opponents while dishing out powerful attacks like Body Slam and Hyper Beam. Its legacy in battle contrasted sharply with its humorous design, making it both lovable and intimidating. Cultural myths sprang up around its encounters. Some players believed that defeating Snorlax without catching it prevented the player from reaching the Elite Four, while others thought that using specific music tracks with the Poké Flute would change its nature. Although none of these were true, they reflect how its unique presence encouraged speculation. As a gatekeeper, Snorlax represents Kanto's design philosophy, obstacles that felt alive, integrated into the world, rather than arbitrary. Its blend of humor, power, and scarcity turned what could have been a simple roadblock into one of the most iconic moments of the series. While players often think of Kanto as a fictional region, its design is deeply rooted in real-world Japan. The very name Kanto is a direct reference to the real Kanto region surrounding Tokyo, though localized spelling changes simplified it for international audiences. This grounding in real geography gives Kanto a sense of coherence, even though its maps are stylized for gameplay. One obscure detail lies in the naming of towns. Nearly every settlement in Kanto is named after colors: Viridian, Cerulean, Vermilion, Lavender, and so on. This pattern created a mnemonic structure that made locations easy to remember, while also tying them to visual themes. Lavender, for example, matched the town's eerie purple palette and spectral focus, while Cerulean reflected its water gem and Misty's identity. The choice to use color names was deliberate, as developers wanted children to be able to easily link towns to their gym leaders and environments. The map layout itself reflects a miniature version of Japan's Kanto Plain. Pallet Town corresponds to more rural outskirts, while cities like Saffron mirror Tokyo as an urban hub. Vermilion, with its harbor and An, reflects Yokohama, Japan's most famous port city. These parallels were subtle, but they gave Japanese players an immediate sense of familiarity. For international audiences, they provided a stylized glimpse into Japanese geography without explicit explanation. Route design adds another layer. The numbering of routes in Kanto begins with Route 1 outside Palette and climbs steadily, reinforcing the sense of a linear journey. However, many routes include loops, hidden side paths, and connections to caves or forests. This structure mimics traditional Japanese pilgrimage routes, where travel itself was seen as a process of growth. Players unknowingly participated in this cultural tradition by walking from town to town, facing trials at each stop. An overlooked detail involves the power plant and its placement near a river. In Japan during the 1990s, nuclear power and energy infrastructure were subjects of debate, and the power plant in Kanto may have been a subtle nod to contemporary issues. The abandoned building filled with electric types served both as a dungeon and a commentary on industrial remnants in the countryside. While never confirmed by developers, the symbolism fits with the series' recurring themes of technology versus nature. Cultural myths also influence design. Saffron City, with its tall buildings and corporate headquarters, represents the tension between traditional life and modern business. Silphco, the corporation at its center, mirrors real Japanese tech companies that dominated headlines in the era. By placing Team Rocket's takeover within this skyscraper, the games symbolically tied crime and corruption to unchecked corporate power, a theme resonant in 1990s Japan. Another obscure cultural tie is the Safari Zone, inspired by both Japanese zoos and foreign safari parks. At the time, many Japanese children were fascinated by exotic animals, and the idea of paying for limited access to catch rare Pokémon mirrored real-world experiences. The mechanics of rocks and bait, while strange, can be seen as gamified versions of feeding and observing animals in such parks. The placement of caves throughout Kanto also reflects cultural geography. Mount Moon, for instance, references Japanese myths about rabbits on the moon and celestial connections, while Victory Road serves as a metaphorical pilgrimage before reaching enlightenment at the Pokémon League. These symbolic structures elevate the region beyond a simple map into a cultural journey. Music further deepened the sense of place. Each town had a distinct theme that reinforced its identity, from the peaceful tones of Pallet Town to the bustling rhythm of Saffron. Composers used limited Game Boy hardware to evoke real-world moods, peaceful rural life, seaside energy, or eerie silence. For Japanese players, these moods echoed familiar cultural spaces. For international audiences, they created lasting emotional imprints that defined Kanto's legacy. Remakes like Fire Red and Leaf Green, as well as Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, preserved these parallels while modernizing graphics. Yet even with visual updates, the symbolic geography remained intact. Palette was still the quiet beginning, Saffron the urban sprawl, Lavender the eerie heart. The fact that these associations hold across decades proves how carefully the original design drew from real-world inspiration. Kanto's geography is more than a backdrop. It is a cultural lens. Through town names, route structures, and environmental symbols, the region introduced millions of players worldwide to aspects of Japanese culture, often without them realizing it. That subtle layering is part of why the first generation left such a profound mark, ensuring that Kanto would remain iconic long after players had moved on to new regions. One of the most defining aspects of Kanto was not just its story or its creatures, but the way its code functioned or failed to function. The original red, green, and blue versions were rushed to release, leaving behind quirks and oversights that players discovered through experimentation. These glitches became as much a part of Kanto's identity as its gyms or towns, creating myths and shaping how children interacted with the games. One of the most famous, beyond the existence of Missing No, was the Old Man glitch. In Viridian City, a character demonstrated how to catch Pokémonday. To program this sequence, developers temporarily overwrote the player's name in memory with the string Old Man. Because of this, when players flew directly to Cinnabar Island and surfed along its eastern coast, the game read leftover data from the player's name as wild encounter data. The result was encounters with strange Pokémon or Missing No itself. This glitch spread like wildfire in playgrounds, teaching children rudimentary memory manipulation before they even knew what coding was. Trainer Fly was another iconic glitch. By interrupting a trainer's sightline with the use of Fly or Teleport, players could trick the game into storing an encounter for later. By manipulating memory values tied to the player's last battle, it was possible to encounter specific Pokémon in the wild, including the elusive Mew. This discovery sparked one of the most enduring myths in gaming history that Mew could be found under the truck near the SS Anne. While the truck itself had no actual function, its mysterious placement near an inaccessible part of the harbor fueled speculation. For years, children swore that using strength or special items could move the truck to reveal the hidden creature. Obscure data also revealed unused content. Within the code were leftover slots for Pokémon, incomplete moves, and missing cries. Some researchers later uncovered ghost data for Pokémon that did not make it into the final release, hinting at early designs that were cut. These remnants gave rise to fan speculation about lost species, fueling a fascination with the idea of hidden Pokémon beyond the official roster. Stat mechanics also contributed to the glitch culture. Critical hits were determined by a formula based on speed, meaning faster Pokémon had disproportionately higher chances of landing critical strikes. This made creatures like Jolteon or Persian far deadlier than their stats suggested. Few players understood this at the time, but they recognized that certain Pokémon seemed to score criticals suspiciously often. The imbalance was left uncorrected until later generations, but in Kanto, it added an unpredictable edge to battles. Another obscure quirk was the 1-256 miss glitch. Due to a programming oversight, even moves listed as having 100% accuracy technically had a 1 in 256 chance of missing. For children encountering this, it often felt like bad luck rather than a mechanical flaw, but data miners later confirmed the truth. This discovery reinforced the sense that the games had hidden layers where even the most reliable moves could betray you. Hall of Fame corruption provided one of the strangest visual effects in the game. After encountering Missing No or performing certain glitches, the Hall of Fame screen would display scrambled sprites and bizarre nicknames. For many players, this felt like uncovering a forbidden part of the game, as though the cartridge itself was haunted. In reality, it was simply a matter of memory overflow, but the aesthetic of scrambled sprites made it one of the most unnerving discoveries. The existence of these glitches reflects the constraints under which Game Freak developed the first generation. Limited memory, tight deadlines, and ambitious design left little room for perfection. Yet, rather than diminishing the games, these flaws became part of their charm. For children, stumbling across a glitch felt like uncovering a secret door, proof that the world of Kanto was alive in ways the developers hadn't intended. Community myths only amplified this. Stories spread about hidden evolutions, alternate forms, or entire towns accessible through glitches. While most were false, the fact that so many children independently created myths speaks to how powerfully the glitches engaged imagination. Kanto's code was not just functional, it was fertile ground for storytelling. Even today, glitch hunting remains a thriving subculture. Speedrunners exploit quirks in the original games to complete them in minutes, while researchers continue to uncover new ways to manipulate memory. Kanto's glitches are studied as much as its creatures, proving that flaws can create legacies as enduring as design. Kanto's impact did not end with Red and Blue. Over the decades, it has been revisited through multiple remakes and reinterpretations, each reshaping the familiar region for new audiences while preserving its core identity. These remakes serve as living records of how technology, culture, and nostalgia evolved together. The first major return came with Fire Red and Leaf Green on the Game Boy Advance in 2004. These remakes modernized Kanto with updated graphics, color palettes, and mechanics from Generation 3. One obscure detail is that these versions included the Sevii Islands, a completely new area not present in the originals. This addition allowed players to catch species from Johto and Hoenn, bridging generations in a way the originals could not. For many fans, the Sevi Islands felt like hidden bonus content, an expansion before downloadable expansions became common. Fire Red and Leaf Green also updated mechanics that had been flawed in the originals. The special stat, once a single value, was split into special attack and special defense, correcting balance issues that had made psychic types overpowered. Moves were rebalanced, items like berries were introduced, and breeding mechanics expanded. Yet despite these modernizations, the remakes preserved Kanto's geography almost perfectly, allowing older fans to experience familiar routes with new clarity. In 2018, Kanto was reimagined again in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee on the Nintendo Switch. These games blended nostalgia with accessibility, aiming to attract both veterans and newcomers. One of the most significant changes was the removal of wild battles in favor of catching mechanics inspired by Pokémon Go. For many longtime players, this was controversial, as it altered the fundamental experience of grinding through encounters. However, it also allowed for smoother pacing and visual immersion, since creatures appeared directly in the overworld. An obscure detail in Let's Go is that shiny Pokémon appear visibly in the overworld, a first for mainline games. This mechanic made shiny hunting more accessible and visually rewarding, creating a new layer of excitement in a familiar region. Trainers could now spot a sparkling form before battle, transforming Kanto's fields and caves into glittering treasure hunts. The remakes also emphasized companionship. Just as Pokémon Yellow had allowed Pikachu to follow the player, Let's Go expanded this to nearly every creature. Larger ones, like Onix or Charizard, could be ridden across the map, turning nostalgia into spectacle. For players who grew up imagining their Pokémon by their side, this mechanic made childhood dreams tangible. Music updates across remakes provide another subtle but powerful detail. Fire Red and Leaf Green orchestrated the chiptune tracks with richer instrumentation, while Let's Go reinterpreted them with modern soundscapes. Lavender Town's eerie theme, Vermilion's harbor melody, and Pallet Town's gentle tune all gained new dimensions while preserving their core identity. These updates reinforced the emotional connection fans had carried for decades. Cultural context also shifted with each remake. Fire Red and Leaf Green arrived at a time when Pokemon's popularity had waned somewhat, serving as a nostalgic bridge for older fans. Let's Go, by contrast, was released during a renewed wave of global popularity sparked by Pokémon Go, targeting both returning fans and new audiences who had never played the originals. The way Kanto was presented reflected these cultural moments, one as a preservation of history, the other as a reinvention for accessibility. Shiny hunting became a cultural phenomenon in Let's Go due to the chain combo system. By catching multiple copies of the same species in a row, players could drastically increase shiny odds. This system turned shiny hunting into a deliberate strategy rather than a matter of random chance, making Kanto once again the center of innovation for the franchise. Through all its remakes, Kanto has remained the most revisited region in the series. While Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh have received remakes, none have been reinterpreted as many times as Kanto. This reflects not only its foundational role, but its symbolic weight as the birthplace of the franchise. For many players, returning to Pallet Town feels like returning home, no matter how many new regions have been introduced. The legacy of Kanto's remakes lies in their ability to adapt. Fire Red and Leaf Green preserved history while smoothing mechanics. Let's Go reinvented structure while emphasizing companionship. Each version introduced new generations to the same map, the same journey, the same identity. Through these retellings, Kanto proves that it is not just a region on a cartridge, but a cultural touchstone that evolves alongside its audience. One of the most overlooked aspects of Kanto is not its maps or its creatures, but its music. With only 4 sound channels on the Game Boy, composer Junichi Masuda crafted a soundtrack that became one of the most iconic in video game history. Every town, route, and cave carried a melody that reinforced its atmosphere, turning limited hardware into emotional storytelling. Pallet Town's theme set the tone from the beginning, a simple, nostalgic melody that conveyed both safety and the sense of a journey about to begin. For millions of children, those first notes became synonymous with adventure. The decision to keep the track minimal made it easy to loop without fatigue, important for an opening town players might linger in. Viridian Forest introduced a different atmosphere. The track used quick, repeating notes to mimic tension, capturing the feeling of wandering through tall grass where hidden encounters lurked. This music, paired with the dim forest palette, created suspense, making even the discovery of common insects feel significant. When players stumbled across Pikachu in this area, the music amplified the sense of surprise, reinforcing the idea that hidden treasures might appear anywhere. The most infamous piece remains Lavender Town's theme. Its high-pitched tones and unsettling minor key progression were unlike anything else in the game. Myths later spread that the frequency of the sound caused dizziness or unease, fueling urban legends about Lavender Town syndrome. While untrue, the persistence of the myth demonstrates how deeply the track affected players. The association between sound and fear was intentional. Masuda has explained that the piece was meant to evoke sadness, a bold choice for a game often remembered for cheerful tunes. Gym leader themes added another layer of identity. The battle music, with its urgent tempo, distinguished these fights from standard encounters, signaling importance. The Elite Four's theme escalated tension further, pushing the Game Boy's sound chip to its limits with rapid arpeggios. By the time players reached the champion, the climactic track delivered a sense of finality, making the musical progression mirror the narrative arc. Vermilion City's theme carried a maritime flair, using flowing notes that evoked harbors and ocean breezes. This complemented the presence of the S, and tying sound directly to environment. Cerulean City's melody, by contrast, was lighter and more playful, fitting its water-themed gym and Misty's youthful energy. Each town's identity became inseparable from its theme, embedding itself into memory through repetition. Route themes also deserve attention. Route 1's melody balanced simplicity with optimism, while later routes introduced more complex rhythms. These tracks guided players through long stretches of walking, ensuring the journey never felt monotonous. Even caves, often frustrating with random encounters, were given distinctive music that reinforced the sense of mystery. Obscure trivia includes the fact that some tracks reused motifs from earlier Game Freak titles, particularly Mendel Palace, one of the company's first games. Masuda carried over certain melodic structures, showing continuity in style. Another obscure fact is that the cries of Pokémon were also technically music, each generated through variations of the sound engine. These cries, though limited, gave individuality to each creature. In later remakes, the music was reimagined with richer instrumentation. Fire Red and Leaf Green orchestrated the tracks with fuller sound, while Let's Go used modern arrangements that preserved the core melodies. Lavender Town's theme, in particular, was softened slightly, though still eerie, showing how even subtle changes could shift atmosphere. Fans often debate which version captures the true emotion of Kanto, but all agree that the original Game Boy tracks remain iconic. The soundtrack's legacy endures because it was more than background, it was storytelling. With limited graphics and dialogue, music carried emotional weight. The combination of visual simplicity and melodic depth created an immersive atmosphere, ensuring that even decades later, hearing the first notes of Pallet Town or Lavender Town can transport players instantly back to their first adventure. Beyond the journey of collecting badges and challenging the Elite Four, Kanto laid the foundation for competitive battling. While the original games were not designed with tournaments in mind, their mechanics and the introduction of the link cable created a culture of competition that shaped the franchise's future. One of the earliest competitive quirks involved critical hits. In Generation 1, critical hit chance was calculated based on speed. This meant that faster Pokémon like Persian had disproportionately high chances of landing critical strikes, making them more dangerous than their base stats suggested. This imbalance was obscure to most players at the time, but competitive communities quickly recognized its impact, creating strategies around speed. Hyper Beam was another move that dominated early battles. Unlike in later generations, it did not require a recharge if it knocked out an opponent. This allowed powerful creatures like Tauros or Snorlax to chain KOs with devastating effect. For many players, Hyper Beam became a symbol of overwhelming power, though few realized it was partially the result of a coding oversight. Sleep mechanics also played a pivotal role. In Generation I, sleep did not decrement at the end of a turn, meaning a Pokémon could remain asleep indefinitely until it woke. This made moves like Hypnosis and Sleep Powder incredibly powerful, turning sleep into one of the most feared status conditions. Combined with trapping moves like Wrap or Bind, battles could become one-sided quickly. The link cable transformed battling from a solitary experience into a social one. For the first time, children could connect their Game Boys and test their teams against friends. This created playground metagames where certain strategies dominated. Psychic types, with their high stats and lack of true counters, became overwhelming. Alakazam and Starmie in particular defined early competition, supported by Chansey's bulk and Tauros's offensive power. This environment, while unbalanced, set the stage for organized battling. Nintendo quickly recognized the potential and began hosting official tournaments. In Japan, events like Space World introduced structured battling, encouraging players to bring their strongest teams. Internationally, the trend followed, with competitions appearing in magazines and promotional tours. These early tournaments established Pokémon not just as a single-player RPG, but as a competitive community, a legacy that continues through modern world championships. Obscure facts include the dominance of certain overlooked species. For example, Rhydon's access to powerful physical moves made it a staple in some formats, while Exeggutor's sleep powder gave it utility despite common weaknesses. Competitive communities documented these strategies in early fan publications, some of which survive today as relics of gaming history. Another obscure quirk was the one-move glitch involving Wrap and Bind. These trapping moves prevented opponents from acting, creating near-infinite lockouts when combined with paralysis. Players exploited this to devastating effect, though it often made battles less enjoyable. Developers later adjusted mechanics to prevent such dominance, but in Kanto, it was simply part of the metagame. The culture of competition extended beyond mechanics. Owning a link cable became a social status symbol, as it allowed players to prove their skills in real battles. Friendships and rivalries formed around who had the strongest team, echoing the themes of the games themselves. For many children, these battles were their first taste of organized strategy. Kanto's competitive scene laid the groundwork for everything that followed. From critical hit quirks to hyper beam dominance, from psychic-type supremacy to the rise of tournaments, it proved that Pokémon could be more than a single-player adventure. It became a shared experience, a cultural touchstone that merged gameplay with community. Few regions in gaming have produced as many myths and urban legends as Kanto. While the games themselves were relatively straightforward, the combination of hidden data, unusual design choices, and children's imaginations transformed the first generation into fertile ground for rumors. Some of these legends became so widespread that they remain cultural touchstones decades later. The most infamous of these is the Lavender Town syndrome myth. This story, which spread widely in the early days of internet creepypasta, claimed that the high-pitched tones of Lavender Town's music caused illness, headaches, or even worse outcomes in children. The myth tied itself to the eerie atmosphere of the town and the unsettling theme, blending fact and fiction into a narrative that seemed plausible to those unfamiliar with audio frequencies. While no evidence ever supported these claims, the story spread because it resonated with the emotional truth. Lavender Town really did unsettle players. The myth elevated what was already an eerie track into one of the most famous pieces of video game folklore. Another enduring myth involved the truck near the S.S. Anne in Vermilion City. After the ship sailed away, players could still see a small truck sprite near the harbor, inaccessible without cheats or glitches. Because it seemed out of place in a world without many vehicles, children speculated that it must hide a secret. The most popular rumor was that using strength on the truck would reveal Mew. This belief spread across playgrounds and magazines, becoming one of the most iconic gaming rumors of the 1990s. Although untrue, the persistence of the myth reflects how strongly players wanted secrets in Kanto's world. Myths also grew around the Missing No glitch. While the actual glitch produced scrambled sprites and item duplication, rumors claimed that capturing Missing No would evolve it into hidden Pokémon or unlock cut content. Some players even insisted it was tied to the appearance of the elusive Mew. These myths blurred the line between accident and intention, turning a programming oversight into a cultural legend. Obscure myths extended even further. Some children claimed that using the item Poké Doll on the ghost Marowak in Lavender Tower would allow it to be caught, despite the encounter being scripted to end only when defeated. Others swore that by fishing in specific tiles of water, like near Cerulean Cave, legendary Pokémon could be obtained. These rumors reflected the power of Kanto's design. Its world was open enough and mysterious enough that players could imagine hidden possibilities just beyond their reach. The Safari Zone generated its own share of myths. Because its mechanics were unusual and encounters often fled, children speculated about hidden tricks to guarantee captures. Some believed that throwing bait and rocks in specific sequences would influence outcomes. Others claimed that hidden Pokémon could appear if players walked the maximum number of steps without catching anything. These myths, though unfounded, added to the atmosphere of the Safari Zone as a place of mystery and challenge. The link cable also inspired rumors. Because trading was a new feature, many children believed that certain evolutions could be reversed through trading, or that traded Pokémon retained hidden stats. Some claimed that trading two identical species created a new one. While these were untrue, they reveal how groundbreaking the social aspects of Kanto were. When combined with imagination, they produced entire mythologies. Urban legends extended beyond gameplay. Some children speculated that the Pokémon Tower was haunted in real life, with cartridges cursed by the ghosts within. Others tied the games to larger myths about spirits or supernatural events, reflecting the cultural fascination with ghosts in 1990s Japan. Internationally, these legends spread through playground storytelling, evolving with each retelling until they became indistinguishable from truth. The persistence of these myths highlights an important point. Kanto's design encouraged curiosity. Its glitches, its unexplained sprites, and its hidden areas gave players just enough mystery to fill in the gaps with imagination. Whether through the truck, Missing No, or Lavender Town, the myths became as much a part of the experience as the official story. For many fans, half the magic of Kanto was not just what was on the cartridge, but what might have been hidden within. When fans speak of Kanto, they rarely refer only to the first generation of games. Instead, they evoke a legacy that has endured across decades, shaping not only future regions, but the very identity of Pokémon as a franchise. The enduring influence of Kanto can be seen in its design templates, its recurring creatures, and the nostalgia that continues to fuel remakes and cultural references. One of the most significant aspects of Kanto's influence is its map design. The structure of beginning in a small hometown, traveling through forests, defeating gym leaders, and culminating in an elite challenge became the blueprint for nearly every region that followed. While later generations added variations such as contests, secret bases, or wild area mechanics, the fundamental journey structure traces directly back to Kanto. This design proved so effective that it became synonymous with Pokémon itself. The creatures introduced in Kanto also established archetypes that persist today. The elemental trio of starters set the standard for every generation. Legendary birds created the template for trios of powerful guardians tied to elemental forces. Fossil Pokémon, discovered through excavation and revived with technology, became recurring features across regions. Even novelty species, like Magikarp, evolving into a powerhouse, established tropes that future generations revisited. Kanto's influence also extends into competitive battling. Strategies developed during the first generation, such as exploiting speed for critical hits or using status conditions for control, laid the groundwork for later metagames. Many of the original 151 species remain staples in modern formats, with creatures like Gengar, Snorlax, and Tauros remembered for their early dominance. Cultural impact cannot be overstated. Pikachu, originating in Kanto, became a global mascot recognized even by those who never played the games. Charizard rose to near-mythic status, appearing on merchandise, in tournaments, and in fan culture for decades. Even less celebrated creatures, like Ditto or Farfetch'd, gained notoriety through myths and quirks that originated in the first generation. Kanto's roster remains one of the most recognizable in gaming history. Remakes and revisits further cement its influence. Fire Red and Leaf Green preserved the journey for the Game Boy Advance generation. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee reimagined it for the Switch era. Kanto has also been revisited within later games, such as Gold and Silver's post-game access to the region. Each return reinforced the idea that Kanto is not simply the beginning, but the eternal home of the franchise. Obscure influences appear in subtle places. Town naming conventions, based on colors, inspired later themes like flowers, gems, or cloud formations. The blending of natural and industrial spaces in Kanto set the stage for regions like Unova, which explored urban identity even further. Even the balance of humor, mystery, and myth established in Kanto became a model for how Pokémon games could blend tones. Nostalgia ensures that Kanto remains relevant. For fans who began in 1996, the region represents childhood memories. For newer generations, it serves as a historical touchstone, a way to connect with the roots of the franchise. This dual identity, personal memory, and cultural symbol gives Kanto a timeless quality unmatched by other regions. The enduring influence of Kanto lies in its ability to be both specific and universal. It is a map of towns and routes, but also a blueprint for storytelling. It is a roster of 151 creatures, but also a set of archetypes that continue to evolve. More than anything, it is a reminder that sometimes the simplest beginnings, one boy, one girl, one small town, can ignite a cultural phenomenon that lasts for generations.